Hello, welcome to King Info. Today we are going to talk about KGB. KGB stands for Komitet Gosударственной Безопасности, which translates to Committee for State Security. The KGB headquarters occupied what is now a famous structure at Lubyanka Square, and not Red Square, in Moscow. That same building is now home to the FSB, or Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation, which serves a similar function as the KGB once did, and its reputation is becoming almost as notorious. Notably, current Russian Federation head of state Vladimir Putin also worked for the KGB as a foreign intelligence officer from 1975 to 1991. Although the KGB did not work directly in the satellite republics that were part of the Soviet Union at the time, each of these countries had its own versions of the agency, which were designed in much the same way and carried out many of the same duties. KGB in the United States. The KGB was established under the leadership of Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. Its precursor was the People's Commissariat for State Security, or NKGB, which operated immediately prior to when during World War II when Joseph Stalin was the head of state. In fact, it was said that NKGB spies were so effective that Stalin knew far more about the military activities of his allies in World War II, namely the United States, France, and Great Britain, than they knew about the Soviet Union's military. Although U.S. officials and leaders within the Office of Strategic Service, the agency that ultimately morphed into the Central Intelligence Agency, were concerned about Soviet espionage activities during the war. NKGB spies were said to have infiltrated the nuclear weapon research facility in Los Alamos, New Mexico. These worries became more pronounced after the war ended. In fact, the KGB's influence on world affairs arguably reached its height during the early part of the Cold War, the period of diplomatic and strategic acrimony between the Soviet Union and the United States and its Western European allies. Red Scare. Soviet spy services under any name struggled to get a foothold in the United States in the early post-war period. This was due in part to the investigations spurred by the Red Scare of the late 1940s and 1950s, during which time U.S. officials and law enforcement leaders became particularly concerned about communist infiltration into American affairs, both in the United States and abroad. The Red Scare led to the congressional hearings spearheaded by Senator Joseph McCarthy, who attempted to identify and thwart communist influence in American society. These events and the House Un-American Activities Committee are credited with bringing down much of the U.S. branch of the Communist Party, hampering KGB recruitment. Despite this resistance, the Soviets were not easily deterred, and they would ultimately succeed in recruiting U.S. Naval Officer John Anthony Walker Jr. into the KGB in the late 1960s. He would later be accused and convicted of providing information to the Soviets, including classified naval communications, which allowed them to track ship movements and other activities. Walker worked for the KGB until well in the 1980s, when he was arrested. The KGB also recruited CIA officer Aldrich Ames, who divulged the locations and activities of multiple CIA officers stationed all over the world before he was arrested and convicted of espionage in 1994. Ames remains in prison to this day. KGB and the Soviet Union. As notable as the KGB's activities were on foreign soil, the agency is perhaps most infamous for its activities within Russia and Soviet bloc nations. Its primary role within Russia and the satellite republics of the Soviet Union was to quell dissent by first identifying dissidents promoting anti-communist political or religious ideas and then silencing them. To perform this task, KGB agents often used extremely violent means. Indeed, the KGB's primary domestic function was to protect the leaders of the Communist Party within the Soviet Union, and thus maintain political order. KGB becomes the FSB. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the KGB was dissolved and replaced by a new domestic security service, the FSB. The FSB occupies the former KGB headquarters in Moscow, and some allege it performs many of the same tasks as its predecessor, in the name of protecting the interests of the Russian government and its leaders. Although relations between Russia and America have improved somewhat since 1991, the year the Cold War is said to have ended, the FSB and other Russian groups have drawn renewed attention after allegations of meddling in the 2016 and 2020 U.S. presidential elections. In recent years, the FSB has been accused of adopting the same nefarious tactics once employed by the KGB.